Hello. Welcome to Twisted Stories, where intriguing and unexpected stories come to life. Please support the channel by following and sharing. Sebastian Blackwood's phone rang for the 10th time in 20 minutes. His hand trembled as he gripped the device, and the voice on the other end of the line was a tornado of fury and Mandarin that he couldn't understand. Words crashed into each other like violent waves, and he could only make out a few numbers that sounded like threats, terrifying in their cold precision. The contract with the Chinese investors was crumbling right before his eyes, and he had no one, absolutely no one, who could save him in this moment. His official interpreter had quit last night, worn down by an impossible schedule and the crushing pressure of million-dollar negotiations. The three other interpreters he'd contacted weren't answering their phones. Today was Friday afternoon, and by Monday morning, he had to present the final agreement. Otherwise, $300 million would vanish into thin air. On the 35th floor of Blackwood Tower, the air conditioning hummed with artificial cold, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of desperation tightening around his chest. Sebastian paced back and forth across his office, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the black marble floor, each step a reminder of the empire he'd built, and the sickening thought that it was now threatening to collapse. His assistant, Victoria Ashford, a 38-year-old woman in a designer suit with calculating eyes, watched him from the doorway with a blend of practiced concern and barely concealed satisfaction. She'd been waiting for years to see him fail, to see him make a mistake big enough for the board to replace him, preferably with her. If you're enjoying this story, smash that like button and share it with someone who loves a good thriller. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what happens next. Meanwhile, 35 floors below, in the ground floor lobby of Blackwood Tower, Evelyn Carter pushed her delivery cart through the automatic glass doors. She wore the orange uniform of Swift Deliveries, the shirt wrinkled and hanging 2 sizes too large because it was a hand-me-down from an older coworker who'd quit. Her chestnut brown hair was hastily tied into a messy ponytail. A few wisps stuck to her sweat-soaked forehead after 8 hours of racing deliveries across the city. Beneath her eyes lay deep shadows, the imprint of weeks without enough sleep. Evelyn was 27, but the exhaustion etched into her face made her look at least 5 years older than her true age. She pulled out a cracked screen phone bought secondhand from a used shop and checked the list of deliveries she still had to finish today. The lobby of Blackwood Tower felt like a completely different world from the dusty streets outside. The glossy marble floor mirrored the crystal lights hanging from the soaring ceiling. A decorative fountain sat right in the center of the lobby, water murmuring over finely carved stones. Around it were pots of tropical plants that Evelyn guessed were worth more than a full year of her wages put together. She walked up to the security desk, where a middle-aged man in a black uniform sat behind a computer monitor. His eyes slid over her with a look that mixed contempt and indifference. A look Evelyn knew too well after years of doing delivery work. It was the look the wealthy gave the people who served them, as if she were just part of the furniture, not worth noticing or remembering. Evelyn handed over her employee card for him to check, signed her name in the visitor log, then pushed her cart toward the elevators. She passed abstract paintings on the walls, artwork she couldn't understand, but was certain cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. A woman in an elegant suit walked past her in the opposite direction. A faint trail of expensive perfume drifting behind her, and she didn't bother to look at Evelyn for even a second. The elevator at Blackwood Tower was an astonishing piece of architecture, made entirely of glass and gleaming stainless steel. As she stepped inside, Evelyn caught her own reflection in the mirrored wall and had to turn away in that wrinkled orange uniform with sweat, slick hair, and dark circles under her eyes. She looked like a stain in the middle of all this luxury. The feeling of being small, of being lost, of not belonging here, wrapped around her the way it always did whenever she had to deliver to buildings owned by the upper class. Evelyn glanced back down at the cracked phone screen and checked the details of the last order of the day. The 35th floor, Blackwood Tower. Urgent legal documents. She pressed the button for 35, and the elevator began to glide upward, smooth and silent, carrying her higher through the floors. Through the clear glass walls, Evelyn could see the whole city of New York spread out beneath her. The skyscrapers, the busy streets, the tiny cars that looked like toys. This was a view people like her rarely got to see. The view of those who stood at the peak of power and money. But what no one in this building knew, what no one at her job knew, was that Evelyn Carter possessed a gift that very few people in the world had. A gift that was about to change everything. The elevator stopped on the 35th floor with a gentle chime. The doors opened slowly, revealing a hallway lined with cream-colored carpet, frosted glass walls, and contemporary art hung along both sides. Evelyn pushed her delivery cart out, and immediately she heard shouting echoing from an office nearby. It was a man's voice, thick with desperation and panic, tangled with another voice coming through a phone speaker, angry and sharp in a strange language that most people wouldn't be able to understand. Evelyn pushed her delivery cart to the reception desk at the end of the hallway. Behind it stood a young woman named Cynthia, with flawless makeup that hadn't smudged in the slightest. Gel nails painted a deep expensive wine red, and glossy blonde hair curled with deliberate care. Cynthia looked Evelyn up and down with undisguised disdain. Her gaze pausing on the wrinkled orange uniform, the worn-out sneakers, and the rickety delivery cart. Evelyn was used to looks like that, so she simply pulled the envelope of urgent legal documents from her delivery bag and handed it to the receptionist. Cynthia took the envelope with exaggerated caution, making sure her costly polished fingers didn't brush Evelyn's hand, as if poverty were an infectious disease that could spread through skin-to-skin contact. She glanced at the envelope, then tossed out a short order in a commanding tone, "Wait here." And then Cynthia disappeared into the inner corridor, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the middle of the luxurious waiting area. The shouting from the nearby office grew clearer by the second. Evelyn could now hear a man's panicked voice, trying to communicate in clumsy English, stammering apologies and offering explanations that didn't hold together. Woven through it was another voice coming from the phone speaker. The voice of an older man speaking Mandarin, at a pace like machine gun fire. Every word loaded with anger and threat. And Evelyn understood everything. She understood that the man on the other end of the line, Mr. Wei, was declaring the contract canceled because of an unacceptable lack of professionalism. He threatened lawsuits, demanded compensation for damages, and vowed to cut off any possibility of future cooperation. But what caught Evelyn most was the moment Mr. Wei mentioned a charity fund, a children's hospital that depended on the money tied to this deal. Sick children were waiting for treatment. And if the contract collapsed, they'd be the ones who would suffer the most. Evelyn's ability to understand 5 different languages wasn't something she was born with. It was the result of a life shaped by scarcity and relentless effort. When she was a child, she often followed her mother to housekeeping jobs for diplomatic families on the Upper East Side, sitting quietly in a kitchen corner, doing homework while the adults talked in every language imaginable. Her elementary school teacher once discovered that Evelyn had an extraordinary photographic memory, that she could retain anything after hearing or seeing it just once. But her family was too poor to develop that gift. So Evelyn taught herself through subtitled movies she watched late at night, when her mother was asleep, through free language apps on her phone, through thousands of YouTube videos taught by teachers from all over the world. English, Mandarin, French, German, Korean. 5 languages she could speak and understand as fluently as her mother tongue. An astonishing talent she'd never had the chance to use for anything beyond movies and books. Evelyn's first instinct was to turn away. This wasn't her business. She was only a delivery driver. Her job was to drop off the envelope and leave. Whatever was happening in that room had nothing to do with her, and she had no right to interfere in the work of powerful people. But then Mr. Wei's words echoed in her mind. Sick children, a children's hospital, waiting for treatment. Evelyn thought of her mother, Margaret, the woman who'd raised her alone and who now had to go to dialysis 3 times a week. She thought of the long nights by her mother's hospital bed, of the raw terror that rose every time she saw the numbers on medical bills. She thought of the children lying in that hospital with their parents sitting beside them carrying the same fear and desperation Evelyn knew too well. Evelyn pushed the delivery cart aside, leaning it against the nearest wall. She drew a deep breath, feeling the cold air conditioning fill her lungs. Then she walked toward the office where the shouting was spilling out, her steps quickening with every second, not allowing herself the time to reconsider or regret what she was about to do. Evelyn shoved the office door open wide without knocking. A vast room with glass walls that looked out over all of Manhattan spread out before her, and in the center stood a tall man in an expensive black suit planted in front of a computer monitor, his face flushed a harsh red from a volatile mix of anger and desperation. Sebastian Blackwood whipped around at the sound of the door, and when he saw a delivery girl in a wrinkled orange uniform standing in the doorway, he roared, "Who are you? Get out now." Victoria Ashford, the woman Evelyn had briefly seen in the hook, immediately moved toward her with a phone in her hand, her voice sharp and shrill. "Security. There's an intruder." But Evelyn didn't stop. She walked straight to the computer screen, where the face of an older Chinese man filled the frame. His fury still burning hot. She drew a deep breath, then spoke in Mandarin, precise and flawlessly polite. "Mr. Wei, please accept our most sincere apologies for this misunderstanding. If you can give us 10 minutes, I can clarify any confusion and ensure this partnership proceeds with the respect it truly deserves." Silence dropped over the room like a heavy blanket. Sebastian froze with his mouth hanging open, staring at the delivery girl, as if she'd just grown a second head. Victoria went pale, her fingers clamping around the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white, her eyes flicking back and forth between Evelyn and the screen with confusion and something that looked a lot like fear. On the monitor, Mr. Wei said nothing for 5 long, endless seconds, his gaze drilling into Evelyn as if he were trying to read her soul. Then, at last, he spoke, his voice still cold, but no longer blazing with the same initial rage. Interesting. You have 10 minutes. Evelyn turned to Sebastian, her voice quick and professional, as if she'd done this work all her life. Tell me the key points of the contract. Hurry. Sebastian was still in shock. But a businessman's instinct for survival pushed him into motion. And he began to explain. A $300 million investment agreement, expansion into the Asian market, a charity fund for a children's hospital, profit sharing, intellectual property terms. Evelyn listened, nodded once, then turned back to the screen, and began speaking to Mr. Wei. But she wasn't simply translating word for word. She was translating culture, context, everything that wasn't being said out loud. She understood that in Chinese business culture, the idea of guanxi, the web of relationship and trust, mattered more than any contract clause ever could. She explained that the interpreter's sudden resignation was an unforeseen incident, and it didn't reflect any lack of respect from the Blackwood Empire toward their partner. She emphasized that Sebastian had tried every possible way to keep this meeting alive because he valued his relationship with Mr. Wei and his company, not only for money, but for genuine respect between both sides. The next 45 minutes passed in unbearable tension. Mr. Wei asked questions, and Evelyn answered as smoothly as running water. She handled each point of dispute with skill and finesse, never letting the conversation hit a dead end. When Mr. Wei asked about long-term commitment, she carried Sebastian's sincerity across in language that fit the Chinese culture. When he voiced concern about information leaks, she explained the security measures with clarity and persuasion. Sebastian stood beside her, watching with eyes that grew more astonished by the minute. He'd met many interpreters in his life, people who'd graduated from prestigious universities with degrees and certificates piled high. But none of them could compare to this delivery girl. She didn't just speak the language. She understood it. She didn't just translate words, she translated meaning. At last, Mr. Wei's voice softened. He nodded slowly, and Evelyn could see the anger in his eyes being replaced by curiosity and a hint of genuine impression. Mr. Wei said he'd give them until Monday to prepare the final agreement, and he wanted this talented interpreter present at the official meeting. In the corner of the room, Victoria stood still as stone. The fake smile remained frozen on her lips, but her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles stayed white, and the look she gave Evelyn was ice cold, holding something dangerous and calculating. The screen went dark after Mr. Wei's farewell. Sebastian stood in the middle of the room, staring at Evelyn as if she'd just saved his life. And in a way, she had. He opened his mouth, his voice rough with disbelief. Who are you? Evelyn shrugged, her face calm, as if what had just happened was nothing special at all. I'm just a delivery girl. Your package is at the front desk. Evelyn turned to leave the office, but Sebastian's voice rose behind her and stopped her in place. Wait, I need you. The meeting on Monday. I need an interpreter. Someone who can do what you just did. Evelyn turned back, looking at the powerful man standing in the middle of that lavish office. His expression caught between astonishment and urgent need. Sebastian stepped toward her, his voice carrying a pressure he couldn't hide. I'll pay you $5,000 for 3 days of work. Saturday to prepare the documents. Sunday to study the contract. Monday for the official meeting. Evelyn hesitated. $5,000 was a staggering number to her. But she had her delivery job. She had her evening shifts at the bar. And most of all, she had a mother who needed care every day. I've got other work. I can't just quit suddenly like that. Sebastian studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a short call. When he hung up, he looked at Evelyn with the steady confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted. I just called your delivery company. You've got 3 days of paid leave and the bar. I'll pay you double what you'd make over those 3 nights. Evelyn felt a small flare of anger kindle in her chest at the way he'd stepped into her life without asking, but she held it down. This was the world of the wealthy, where money could smooth over everything. She still shook her head. I don't know. This isn't my job. Sebastian let out a breath. Then his voice hardened into something more decisive. $10,000. That's my final offer. This contract is worth $300 million. $10,000 is nothing. $10,000. The number echoed in Evelyn's mind like a bell. $10,000 was the same as 3 months of her delivery pay put together. Enough to cover her mother's medical bills for 2 months. Enough to stop her from living in fear of rent and eviction. Enough for her mother to get better care. To buy expensive medications. Insurance wouldn't cover. I've got one condition. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice firmer now. I need to go home every night to take care of my mom. My mom's sick. Sebastian nodded at once without the slightest hesitation. Fine, I'll have a car pick you up and take you to work every day. Anything you need. From the corner of the room, Victoria stepped forward. A sweet smile blooming on her lips that didn't reach her cold eyes. She seems capable. Maybe she'll be useful to you, Sebastian. Victoria's tone sounded like support, but Evelyn felt something off in the way that woman looked at her. That gaze was ice cold, full of calculation and maybe even hostility Evelyn couldn't explain. Still, she pushed the feeling aside. Maybe she was imagining it. Evelyn nodded to Sebastian, sealing the agreement. I'll be here Saturday morning. Sebastian smiled, and it was the first time Evelyn had seen him smile since she'd walked into this office. Good. You won't regret this decision. Evelyn started to turn and leave. When the office door swung open without warning, a man as big as a bear stepped in, broad-shouldered with rough hands and a long scar running from his temple down to his chin. His eyes slid over Evelyn with a measuring look before settling on Sebastian. Sebastian motioned for Evelyn to go first. Go? I'll see you Saturday. Evelyn hurried out, but before the door closed fully behind her, she caught the low voice of the scarred man. He was speaking in Russian. And even though Evelyn wasn't as strong in Russian as she was in other languages, she still recognized a few words. Shipment, Vyulov, problem. She moved quickly past the reception area, grabbed her delivery cart, where it stood against the wall, and headed for the elevator. When the door shut and carried her down to the ground floor, Evelyn stood there with a storm of mixed feelings. Part of her was flooded with hope, because $10,000 would change her life, and her mother's for the next few months. But another part of her felt uneasy, a vague sense that something wasn't right about the man with the scar, about the Russian conversation, about the way Victoria had looked at her. Evelyn stepped out of Blackwood Tower into the late afternoon of New York City, not knowing she'd just walked into the empire of a mafia boss, and that her life would never be the same again. On Saturday morning, a glossy black limousine pulled up in front of Evelyn's worn old apartment building. She'd never ridden in a car like this in her life. And when the driver in a black uniform opened the door for her, Evelyn felt as if she was stepping into an unreal dream. The car took her to Blackwood Tower, and this time she didn't go through the main entrance. She was brought straight up to the 35th floor through a private elevator reserved for senior staff. A woman from Human Resources was already waiting with a bag of clothes. She led Evelyn into a changing room and explained that these were outfits the company had prepared for her for the duration of her work. Evelyn opened the bag and found a perfectly tailored navy business dress, a sleek pair of black heels, and a crisp white silk blouse. When she finished changing and looked at herself in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize her own face. The woman looking back at her appeared professional and self-assured, nothing like the delivery girl in a wrinkled orange uniform from yesterday. All morning, Evelyn was trained on the company, on key business partners, on the main terms of the contract with Mr. Wei's conglomerate. She read hundreds of pages of documents, marked the most important points, and tried to absorb everything as fast as she could. Around midday, as Evelyn sat alone in a small conference room with a towering stack of paperwork, a young man stepped in with a friendly smile. He looked about 29 with lightly curled brown hair, intelligent eyes behind black-framed glasses, and an easy warmth that felt nothing like the chill Evelyn had sensed from most people here. Hey, you're the one who saved the deal with Mr. Wei, right? That story's already a legend around here. I'm Tyler. Tyler Brooks. Evelyn shook his hand, surprised, because he was the first person in this building to greet her with a genuinely kind smile. Tyler explained that he was the company's information technology specialist, and he'd been assigned to help her get familiar with the internal systems. Over the next few hours, Tyler patiently showed her how to use the software, how to access secured documents, and the procedures she needed to follow. For the first time since she'd stepped into this world, Evelyn felt a little less alone. Late in the afternoon, Evelyn walked past Sebastian's office to pick up additional materials. The door was slightly open and she heard his voice carrying out cold and threatening in a way she'd never heard from him before. Tell Vyulov that if he touches our shipment one more time, there will be consequences. And I'm not talking about lawyers. Evelyn stopped short, her heart hammering in her chest. Those words, Vyulov, shipment, consequences. They didn't sound like the language of an ordinary businessman. Just then, Sebastian turned and saw her standing outside the door. He cut the call off at once, and when he faced her, his expression had already returned to a polite smile, as if that conversation had never happened. Miss Carter, are you ready for tomorrow? Evelyn nodded, forcing her voice to stay calm. Yes, sir, I'm ready. That evening, the limousine brought Evelyn back to the small Brooklyn apartment where she lived with her mother. The place was old, the wallpaper peeling, the wooden floors creaking, but it was clean and warm in its own quiet way. Margaret Carter, Evelyn's mother, sat in a battered armchair, her face thin and pale after dialysis, yet still lighting up with a radiant smile when she saw her daughter walk in. Eve, you're home. How was today? Evelyn sat beside her mother and took her frail hand in both of hers. I'm interpreting for a company, Mom. It's nothing special. Margaret looked at her daughter with eyes full of pride. I've always been proud of you, Evie. You've always been special, even when the whole world couldn't see it. Evelyn cooked a pot of porridge for her mother, then sat by the bed and told her light-hearted stories about her new co-workers. Stories she made up just to make her mother smile. Margaret drifted off with a smile still on her lips, and Evelyn sat there for a long time, looking at her mother and reminding herself that this was why she was doing all of it. That night, Evelyn lay down on the old couch in the living room, giving her mother the only bed. She stared up at the dark ceiling and Sebastian's words kept echoing in her mind. Vyulov shipment consequences. She knew something wasn't right. But then she thought of the pile of medical bills stacked on the table. Thought of her mother's exhausted face after each dialysis session. Thought of the $10,000 that would help them survive the next few months. Just do your job. Take the money. Don't ask too much. And with that thought, Evelyn fell asleep. And for the first time in months, she slept deeply. Not knowing that a storm was waiting for her ahead. After everyone left the conference room and only the two of them remained, Sebastian turned to Evelyn with an entirely different attitude. He motioned for her to sit in the leather chair across from his desk. And for the first time, he treated her like an equal instead of a temporary employee. Evelyn sat down, feeling the shift in the air, but not knowing what was coming. Sebastian was quiet for a moment, as if weighing every word. Then he spoke. I want you to work for me full-time Director of International Relations. Evelyn nearly choked. She stared at Sebastian as if he just told a joke, but the man's face was completely serious. He went on, a salary of $150,000 a year, plus full benefits and comprehensive health insurance. This insurance package will cover every cost of treatment for your mother, including dialysis and any procedures that might be necessary. Evelyn shook her head, trying to pull herself back into reality. I don't have a college degree. I don't have any official certificates. Sebastian looked at her with steady eyes. You just saved a $300 million deal by reading the situation better than anyone I've ever met. That's not something they teach in college. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at Manhattan spread beneath him. Then, without warning, he asked a question Evelyn hadn't expected. You said your mother is sick. What's wrong with her? Evelyn was startled by how personal it was. She hesitated before she answered. Kidney failure. My mom needs dialysis 3 times a week. Insurance only covers a small part of the cost. Sebastian stayed silent for a long time. His eyes still fixed on the window, but his gaze seemed to be somewhere far away. Then he spoke, and his voice carried a note Evelyn had never heard from him before, a softness tucked behind his usual cold control. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. We didn't have insurance, not enough money for treatment. Evelyn looked at Sebastian, and in that moment, she saw something in his eyes, not the cruelty or chill she'd glimpsed before, but pain, an old wound that had never fully healed. She understood that behind this powerful empire, behind the expensive suit and the million-dollar deals, Sebastian Blackwood had once been a helpless child, watching the person he loved most slip away. And then the moment passed. Sebastian turned back, his face returning to its familiar coolness. But his voice held a certainty that couldn't be shaken. The health insurance package I'm offering will cover everything. Your mother will get the best treatment in New York. Evelyn looked down at her hands, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. She knew something was off about this company, about the calls in Russian, about the name Vyulov she'd overheard. But then she thought of her mother, of long nights in the hospital, of the fear that rose every time she saw a medical bill. Finally, she lifted her head and met Sebastian's eyes. "I agree, but I've got one condition. I don't want to know about anything illegal. I'm only doing interpreting and international relations, nothing else." Sebastian nodded, his expression unreadable, like a book written in a language even couldn't understand. "You have my word." But there was something in his tone that made Evelyn feel he knew she wouldn't be able to keep that distance forever. Outside the office, behind the frosted glass wall, Victoria Ashford watched everything. She watched Evelyn sitting across from Sebastian, watched them talk, watched Sebastian smile at the delivery girl in a way he'd never smiled at her in 8 years of working together. Victoria's hands clenched until her knuckles went white. Director of International Relations. The position she'd waited for and quietly aimed at for years was now being handed to a delivery girl who'd appeared out of nowhere. Evelyn signed the contract Sebastian placed in front of her. And as the pen touched the paper, she felt something strange take over her whole body, as if she'd just signed a bargain with the devil, selling her soul in exchange for what she needed most. But then she thought of her mother, of the hospital, of the chance at life this money could bring. And she knew she had no other choice. As she walked out of the office, Evelyn told herself one thing. Some bargains are worth the risk. 3 weeks had passed since Evelyn officially became the Director of International Relations for the Blackwood Empire. And in that short span of time, she'd proven her value again and again. She successfully handled negotiations with a partner from France, using fluent French to persuade them to sign a distribution deal worth tens of millions of dollars. Next came a meeting with a German technology conglomerate, where Evelyn didn't just translate the language. She understood the German temperament, rigid and direct, and helped both sides reach an agreement quickly. Then it was the Korean partners, and once again, Evelyn shone, grasping the rhythm and expectations of Asian business culture, as if she'd lived inside it all her life. International partners began requesting her by name for every negotiation, and Sebastian grew more and more dependent on her in every major deal. One afternoon, while Evelyn sat alone in the employee break room sipping coffee, Tyler Brooks walked in with worry on his face. He glanced around to make sure no one else was there, then sat across from her and lowered his voice. "Eve, you need to be careful with Victoria. She's been here for 8 years. She never likes anyone getting close to Sebastian. And you're getting very close." Evelyn frowned. "I'm just doing my job." Tyler shook his head, his eyes more serious than Evelyn had ever seen them. "The person before you said the exact same thing. The one Victoria took care of. Now he's working at a gas station out in New Jersey. You ever wonder why someone that capable ended up there?" Evelyn wanted to ask more, but Tyler stood up and left as if he was afraid of being seen talking to her for too long. Tyler's warning made Evelyn start paying closer attention to the world around her. And she began to notice how many things were abnormal, things she'd been choosing not to see. Meetings in Sebastian's office at midnight with men speaking Russian. Numbers in the financial reports that didn't match what she could plainly observe. Men with scarred faces and dangerous eyes coming in and out of the building without passing through reception or security. Sebastian would disappear for hours with no one knowing where he'd gone. And when he returned, his face looked carved from stone, his eyes holding something dark. Evelyn didn't want to understand. She knew she should leave. Every survival instinct in her screamed that this place was dangerous, that she was playing with fire, and sooner or later she'd get burned. But then she thought of her mother. Margaret was getting stronger every day thanks to treatment at the best hospital in New York. For the first time in years, her mother had enough energy to walk through the nearby park. Her cheeks rosier, her smile brighter. Evelyn couldn't give that up. And there was another reason she didn't want to admit, something about Sebastian Blackwood that kept her from walking away. Late one night, when the clock had already struck 11 and the building was almost empty, Evelyn was still in her office preparing materials for tomorrow's meeting. She was deeply focused on the computer screen when she heard footsteps. She looked up and saw Sebastian standing in the doorway holding 2 cups of hot coffee. "You're still here," he said, a faint note of surprise in his voice. Evelyn shrugged. "So are you." Sebastian stepped inside, set 1 cup in front of her, then sat down in the chair across from her. He studied her in silence for a long moment, then spoke. "You know, you're the only person in this building who doesn't look at me with fear. Why is that?" Evelyn picked up the coffee, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. Should I be afraid? Sebastian let out a soft laugh. And it was the first time Evelyn had seen him truly laugh. Not the polite smile he wore in negotiations. Not the cold smile he used when dealing with enemies. Everyone else thinks you should be. A quiet moment passed. The two of them watching each other beneath the Offix's gentle yellow light. Something shifted in the air. A thin invisible thread stretching between them that Evelyn couldn't name. Then Sebastian stood, breaking the moment. Get some rest. I need you sharp tomorrow. He walked out and Evelyn watched his back vanish beyond the door, her heart beating faster than normal for a reason she didn't want to admit. At the same time, in another corner of the building, Victoria Ashford sat in her private office with the door shut tight. She pulled a cheap phone from her desk drawer. A disposable burner that couldn't be traced, and dialed a number already saved. After a few rings, a low male voice with a Russian edge came through the line. Victoria spoke, her tone cold and calculating. It's me. I've got what you need, but I want guarantees. Evelyn drove home in the dead of night. Her mind spinning with the image of Sebastian and the rare smile she'd seen. She wondered who he truly was beneath the armor of cold power. She didn't know that in the darkness a trap was being set, and she was the prey. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Blackwood Tower sank into darkness and silence. The empty corridors held only the faint spill of emergency lights, and the steady hum of the air conditioning sounded like the breathing of a sleeping monster. Victoria Ashford stepped out of the private elevator on the 35th floor. Her high heels replaced with soft-soled shoes so she wouldn't make a sound. She went straight to the Human Resources office and used her Heil access card to unlock the door. Inside, she moved quickly to the computer that managed employee access badges and began working. In only a few minutes, Victoria copied the entire data set from Evelyn Carter's keycard onto a blank card, creating a flawless clone that the system would recognize, as if Evelyn herself were using it. With the cloned card in hand, Victoria headed to the server room at the end of the hallway. She swiped the card and the door opened with a quiet beep. The system logging that Evelyn Carter had accessed the server room at 2:17 in the morning. Victoria sat down at one of the computers and began downloading the company's most classified information, lists of partners, and secret contract terms, bank account information for the Blackwood Empire in multiple countries. Business strategy for the next 5 years. All of it was compressed into a single file and sent through encrypted email to an address Victoria had been in contact with for a long time. The address of Alexei Vulov, the Russian mafia boss and the sworn enemy of Sebastian Blackwood. But Victoria didn't stop there. She opened a browser window and logged into the online banking system of a shell company called Northern Star Holdings, a company she knew was tied to the Volkov organization. From that account, she transferred $50,000 into the bank account of Margaret Carter, Evelyn's mother, an amount large enough to look like a payoff for a trader, but not so large that it would immediately raise suspicion. Next, Victoria created a fake email address using Evelyn's name and sent a message to an email linked to Vulov, offering to sell Blackwood Empire's confidential information for a high price. Finally, she slipped a USB drive containing a copy of the stolen data into the desk drawer in Evelyn's office, placing it where any search would easily find it. The trap was perfectly set, but Victoria didn't know she was being watched. Derek Hansen, the 45-year-old night security guard who'd worked at Blackwood Tower for 15 years, sat in the security control room watching the camera feeds. He saw Victoria enter Human Resources, then the server room, and he realized immediately that the card she used wasn't Victoria's. The name shown on the access log screen was Evelyn Carter, but the person standing in front of the camera was clearly Victoria Ashford. Derek wanted to report it right away, but the memory of 3 months ago slammed into him and froze him in place. That night, he'd accidentally seen Victoria meeting a strange man in the underground parking garage, exchanging something. When Victoria realized he'd been watching, she came to him the next day with a voice that sounded sweet and carried nothing but threat. If you say anything, your daughter's scholarship at Columbia will disappear, and that'll only be the beginning. Derek's daughter was in her second year at Columbia University, the greatest pride of his life. The full scholarship was the only thing that allowed her to attend that prestigious school. And Derek knew Victoria had enough power and connections to ruin his daughter's future with a single phone call. He couldn't risk it. But Derek also couldn't completely look away. With trembling hands, he copied the security footage showing Victoria entering the server room onto a personal USB drive. Then he deleted the clip from the main system, leaving a gap in the recording that maybe no one would notice. He hid the USB in his personal locker in the employee changing room, telling himself it was only a precaution, only in case he ever needed it later. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at the office feeling light after a good night's sleep. She stepped out of the elevator and almost immediately saw Victoria standing in the hallway with a bright smile on her lips. "Good morning, Eve. You look like you got plenty of rest." Evelyn smiled back, not noticing anything unusual. "Thank you. You too." She walked past Victoria and headed toward the conference room, where she had an important meeting that morning. She didn't see how Victoria's smile vanished the moment Evelyn turned away, replaced by a look that was cold and ruthless. Victoria watched Evelyn's back disappear through the conference room door, her lips forming a whisper only she could hear. "Enjoy your last days, delivery girl. The trap's already set now. It's just waiting to snap shut." 1 week after the night Victoria set her trap, everything collapsed. That morning began like any other. Evelyn arrived early to prepare for the meeting with the Japanese partners scheduled for the afternoon. But she'd barely sat down at her desk when a shout thundered from Sebastian's office at the end of the hallway. She didn't even have time to understand what was happening before the office door flew open and Sebastian stormed out, his face flushed with rage, the phone still pressed to his ear. He'd just gotten a call from a European partner announcing they were cancelling a deal worth $50 million, a deal they'd been negotiating for months. The reason was Vulov. Sebastian's rival had somehow learned every exact term in the proposal and had killed the deal with a better offer. Information had leaked from inside the Blackwood Empire. Sebastian ordered the security team to launch an internal investigation immediately, and within only a few hours they found the evidence they needed. Evidence that pointed to one person, Evelyn Carter. Evelyn was summoned to the large conference room on the 35th floor early that afternoon. When she walked in, she saw Sebastian seated at the head of the table, his face cold as stone. Beside him sat Victoria, her eyes red, rimmed as if she'd been crying. Richard Thornton, the company's senior advisor, sat across from a thick stack of documents. 2 security guards stood at the door, as if Evelyn were a dangerous criminal who might bolt at any moment. Richard Thornton began laying out the evidence in a flat, emotionless voice. "Your access card was used to enter the server room at 2:17 in the morning 1 week ago. A USB drive containing the company's confidential data was found in your desk drawer. $50,000 was transferred into the bank account of your mother, Margaret Carter, from a company linked to the Volve organization, and an email was sent from an address under your name to Vulov, offering to sell confidential information for a high price." Evelyn listened and couldn't believe what she was hearing. Heat rushed into her face, her heart slamming against her ribs as she realized she was being framed. "I didn't do this," she shouted, her voice shaking with shock and fury. "I don't even know how to get into the server room. That money, I don't know where it came from. That email isn't mine. Someone is setting me up." Victoria broke into sobs, playing the victim perfectly. "I can't believe this. I trusted her." She turned to Sebastian, her voice broken. "I warned you from the beginning. She came out of nowhere. No background check, nothing at all." Richard Thornton looked at Evelyn with cold eyes. "The evidence is crystal clear. Miss Carter, there's nothing to argue here." Evelyn turned to Sebastian, the man she'd worked beside for weeks. The man who told her about his mother's death, the man who brought her coffee during late nights. She searched his eyes for a flicker of hope, a sign that he believed her. But Sebastian didn't look at her. He sat there with his face carved from ice, his gaze fixed on the window, as if Evelyn didn't exist. "Sebastian, please," Evelyn begged, her voice thick with tears. "You know me. You know I'd never do this." Sebastian finally looked at her, and that look froze her to the bone. There was no warmth, no empathy, only cold contempt. "I thought I knew you." Just 5 words. But they cut through Evelyn like knives. She was fired immediately. Her access card was confiscated, her personal belongings seized and shoved into a cardboard box. Richard Thornton warned her that if she said anything about the company to anyone, there would be serious consequences. And Evelyn understood this wasn't an empty threat from an ordinary corporation. 2 security guards escorted her out of the conference room and down the hallway toward the elevators. People stopped working to watch her pass, eyes of contempt and judgment stabbing at her from every side. As she walked past the IT area, Evelyn caught Tyler Brooks's gaze. He stood there holding a cup of coffee gone cold, looking at her with an expression completely different from the others around him. Not disdain, not judgment, but sympathy and maybe even doubt about what had just happened. Tyler gave a small shake of his head, a tiny gesture, as if he were telling her he didn't believe she was guilty. Evelyn held onto that look as she was pushed into the elevator and carried down to the lobby. She stepped out through the main doors of Blackwood Tower, with a cardboard box of her few personal items in her arms. The security staff watching her like a criminal being expelled. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't sob. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. She'd entered this building as an anonymous delivery girl, and now she was walking out as a condemned traitor. Evelyn made it back to her small Brooklyn apartment after the sky had gone fully dark. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cardboard box holding her few personal items feeling heavy in her hands, as if it carried the full weight of everything that had just collapsed. The apartment lay in shadow, with only a small light from the bedroom casting a weak stripe across the floor. Margaret was sitting in the old armchair waiting for her daughter, and the moment she saw Evelyn's face, she knew something was wrong. Evelyn couldn't speak. She set the box down on the floor. Then her legs gave out, and she broke into sobs like a child. Margaret stood at once and went to her, pulling Evelyn into her arms, her frail hands stroking Evelyn's hair. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't question her or judge her. She just held her and whispered in a gentle voice, "No matter what happened, we'll get through it. We always do." That night, Evelyn lay in bed, staring at the black ceiling, her mind spinning with 1,000 tangled thoughts. She'd lost everything. The job she'd thought would change her life was gone. The $50,000 in her mother's account would almost certainly be frozen for investigation, and she didn't know whether they'd be able to prove the money hadn't come from her. Her reputation had been destroyed. She'd been branded a traitor, someone who sold out the company for cash. And worst of all, the health insurance would be cut off, which meant her mother would no longer be treated at the best hospital, and her condition would worsen quickly. Dark thoughts began to slip into Evelyn's mind. Maybe it would be easier if she just gave up. If she didn't have to fight anymore. But then her eyes landed on the photograph on the bedside table. A picture of Jake, her younger brother. Jake Carter, her 19-year-old brother who died 5 years ago. The memory surged back like a wave. She couldn't stop. Jake had been framed for a convenience store robbery. He'd happened to be there at exactly the wrong time. And when the police needed a suspect, they chose the poor white kid from Brooklyn who had no lawyer and no money to defend himself. No one believed Jake was innocent. Not the police, not the neighbors, not even some relatives. Only Evelyn and her mother believed him. Jake had tried to prove his innocence himself. He investigated on his own, searched for witnesses, tried to find the people who'd really done it. But when the gang behind the robbery realized he was digging, they struck. Evelyn was the one who found her brother's body in a dark alley in the Bronx. His face beaten so badly she almost couldn't recognize him. That image had haunted her every night for years. Evelyn stared at Jake's photo, tears running down her cheeks. "You died trying to prove you were innocent, little brother, and no one listened to you." She clenched her hands, her nails digging into her palms until the pain flared. "But I won't make the same mistake you did. I won't die in silence. I'm going to fight." At the same time, on the 35th floor of Blackwood Tower, Sebastian Blackwood sat alone in his dark office, lit only by the glow of a computer screen against his face. A glass of whiskey, half empty, rested in his hand. But he didn't drink again. He was staring at the file of evidence against Evelyn on the screen, reading every detail over and over. Something didn't fit. A vague feeling he couldn't quite name. Why would someone as smart as Evelyn leave evidence that obvious? Why would she use her own card instead of finding a way to cover her tracks? The office door opened and Victoria stepped in. A gentle smile on her lips. "You should go home, Sebastian. Today was a long day." Sebastian looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, a long day." Victoria smiled, then turned and left. Sebastian watched her back disappear, and in his eyes, there was something that hadn't been there before. A small flicker of suspicion. Back in the Brooklyn apartment, Evelyn wiped her tears and sat up. She grabbed a notebook and a pen and began writing down everything she could remember. Who benefited from her getting fired? Who had access to the server room? Who knew her personal information? Knew her mother's bank account? She wrote the name Victoria Ashford and underlined it twice. If they wanted to destroy her, they'd picked the wrong person. The next morning, Evelyn woke with eyes swollen from crying. But her spirit felt entirely different. She sat at the small kitchen table in the apartment, surrounded by sheets of paper crowded with handwritten notes. She'd been awake almost all night breaking the situation apart. And now she could finally see the puzzle pieces sliding into place. Who benefited from her getting fired? The clearest answer was Victoria Ashford, the woman who'd worked beside Sebastian for 8 years and had never bothered to hide her hostility toward Evelyn from the very first day. Victoria wanted power, wanted the Director of International Relations position Evelyn had been given. And more than anything, she wanted to stay close to Sebastian, who had access to the server room, only executives in the information technology department. Victoria was one of them, who knew information about her mother's bank account, only human resources and people with high access in the system. Victoria was on that list, too. Who could create a fake email using her name? Someone with technical knowledge or someone with help. Every thread led back to one name, Victoria Ashford. Evelyn picked up her cracked screen phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Tyler Brooks's number. She remembered the look in his eyes when she'd been escorted out of the office. Full of sympathy and doubt, as if he didn't believe what was happening. That was her only hope now. She drew a deep breath and hit call. Tyler answered after the third ring, his voice cautious. Evelyn spoke fast before he could hang up. Tyler, it's Eve. I know you shouldn't talk to me, but Tyler cut her off, his voice suddenly firm. I know you didn't do it. Evelyn nearly dropped the phone in shock. You believe me? I've worked with enough hackers and criminals in my life. You're not one of them, but Eve, if I help you and they find out, I'll die. You understand that, don't you? Evelyn did understand. She understood Tyler was risking everything, his job, his safety, maybe even his life to help her, and she was grateful beyond words. I understand, but I can't prove I'm innocent on my own without help. Tyler went quiet for a long time, and Evelyn could hear him breathing through the phone. Then, finally, he asked, What do you need? That night, Tyler stayed late at the office under the excuse that he had to fix an urgent system error. When the building was nearly empty, he began digging into system logs he normally had no reason to touch. He traced the IP address of the email that was supposedly sent from Evelyn to Viewlov. And what he found made him read it twice, just to be sure. That email had been sent at 2:30 in the morning, but not from Evelyn's computer, and not from any device registered under her name. It had been sent from the IP address tied to Victoria Ashford's office. Tyler dug further into the building access records and discovered Evelyn had checked out of Blackwood Tower at 7 in the evening the night before, with camera evidence confirming she left the building and didn't return until the next morning. He kept going, following the trail of the $50,000 transferred into Evelyn's mother's account. The money had come from a shell company called Northern Star Holdings. Tyler searched deeper and found Northern Star had direct ties to the Volkov organization, Sebastian's sworn enemy. Near midnight, Tyler called Evelyn back, his voice tense, but charged with excitement. Eve, I found something. The email was sent from the IP address in Victoria's office while you were already home since the evening before. And there's camera proof. And that money, it came from a shell company linked to Viewlov, Sebastian's enemy. Evelyn felt her blood begin to boil. Victoria was selling out the company to the Russians. Tyler continued, his voice turning even more grave. It's worse than that. I think she's been doing this for months. You're just the scapegoat. Evelyn thanked Tyler over and over, but she knew what he'd found still wasn't enough. It was digital evidence, and they could claim it was forged or hacked. She needed something that couldn't be denied. Video or a witness. She thought of the building security staff, the night shift guards who might have seen something. She asked Tyler, who had been on duty the night Victoria went into the server room, and after a few minutes of searching, he gave her a name, Derek Hansen. Evelyn wrote the name down, determination burning hot in her chest. I need to find this man. Tyler helped Evelyn look up the Blackwood Tower security team schedule, and she discovered that Derek Hansen was on the night shift on the exact night Victoria carried out her scheme. He worked from 10 o'clock at night to 6 o'clock in the morning, and after his shift, he usually stopped at a small bar near his place in Queens to have a few drinks before going home to sleep. Evelyn went to that bar early the next morning, sat in a dark corner with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands, and waited. The bar was shabby, lit with dim, hazy light, the air carrying the stale smell of old beer and cigarettes, and a few exhausted men sat scattered at tables after a long night of work. When Derek Hansen walked in, Evelyn recognized him immediately. The 45-year-old man with graying hair and shoulders bent from fatigue halted when he saw her. His face draining pale, as if he'd just seen a ghost. I can't talk to you. You shouldn't be here. Derek turned as if to leave, but Evelyn stood quickly and blocked his path. I know you saw something that night. I could see it in your eyes when I was marched out of the building. You looked at me like you knew I was innocent. Derek shook his head, his voice trembling with fear. You don't understand. She'll destroy me. My daughter's in college. I can't. Evelyn looked straight into his eyes, her voice steady but full of feeling. I've got a mother who's dying, Derek. If I can't prove I'm innocent, I can't take care of her. I've got nothing left to lose. But I know you're not the kind of man who can watch an innocent person get destroyed and do nothing. Derek stood there, his eyes dropped to the filthy bar floor, and Evelyn could see the battle playing out inside him. He went to the bar, ordered a beer, and sat down. Both hands wrapped around the glass, as if he was searching for warmth. Evelyn sat beside him and waited in silence. Derek took a sip, then stared into the empty air. He thought of his daughter, a second-year college student with a dream of becoming a doctor. If she were ever framed the way the girl beside him had been, he'd pray someone would stand up and help her. He thought of 15 years of honest work, of long nights guarding the building, of the self-respect he'd always tried to keep. Could he stay silent forever, live with the weight of knowing the truth and never daring to speak it? Derek let out a sigh, heavy as if it carried the burden of countless sleepless nights. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small USB drive, setting it on the bar top in front of Evelyn. I recorded that night. She went into the server room at 2:17 in the morning. She used a cloned access card. Your card. But the person in the video isn't you. It's Victoria. Evelyn picked up the USB, her hands shaking. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Derek went on, his voice dropping lower. The video shows Victoria clearly. She's dressed in black. She walks into the server room and sits at the computer for nearly an hour. The camera angle is clear, undeniable. She's been selling information to the Russians for months. I was too scared to say anything. But I can't let you take the fall for her. Not like this. Evelyn looked at Derek, gratitude deep in her eyes, tangled with a question she couldn't hold back. Why didn't you come forward from the beginning? Derek gave a bitter, tired smile. The kind that belongs to someone who's lived too long on the bottom rung of the world. Because in this world, people like us never win against people like her. We just survive. Evelyn closed her fist around the USB, feeling its weight, the weight of truth, of justice, of hope. Maybe it was time to change that. She stood and met Derek's eyes with gratitude. Thank you. You've given me a weapon to fight with. Evelyn left the bar with the USB in her pocket. Her mind spinning with what had to happen next. She had Derek's video, Tyler's IP logs, the money trail from Volkov's shell company. Enough evidence to prove she was innocent. But send it to the police. The police didn't get involved with mafia matters, and the Blackwood Empire wasn't an ordinary company. No, she needed to face Sebastian Blackwood directly. Evelyn stood before the main doors of Blackwood Tower, her heart pounding in her chest, but her eyes burning with resolve. She stepped into the lobby, and was immediately stopped by 2 security guards. You're not allowed in this building. Evelyn didn't flinch. She pulled out her phone and dialed Sebastian Blackwood's number, the one she'd kept saved from her days working there. After 3 rings, Sebastian's cold voice came through the line. Evelyn spoke at once, not giving him the chance to hang up. I've got proof of who actually betrayed you. If you don't meet me within 30 minutes, I'll send everything to the FBI and every major news outlet in New York. The choice is yours. Silence stretched for a few seconds and Evelyn could hear Sebastian's breathing through the phone. Maybe deep down he'd never truly believed she was guilty. Maybe he wanted the truth. Or maybe he simply wanted to control the situation before it slipped out of his hands. Let her up, Sebastian said to someone beside him. Then he ended the call. The guards got the order through their earpieces and reluctantly stepped aside. Evelyn entered the elevator, pressed 35, and felt her body rise. When the doors opened, she stepped into the familiar hallway and walked straight to the large conference room. Inside, Sebastian was already seated at the head of the table, his face blank. Richard Thornton sat beside him, and 2 security men stood guard at the door. Victoria Ashford was there as well, summoned by Sebastian's order, and she looked at Evelyn with contempt and confidence. Sebastian, why are you giving her a chance to speak? She's a proven traitor. Sebastian didn't look at Victoria. He stared straight at Evelyn, his eyes unreadable. Let her speak. Evelyn walked to the head of the table across from him and set the laptop she'd borrowed from Tyler on the tabletop. She drew a deep breath and began. Her voice calm and professional, the way it had been in million-dollar negotiations. I've got 4 pieces of evidence that prove I'm innocent and identify the person who truly betrayed the Blackwood Empire. She opened the first video on the screen. First, this is security footage from that night. At 2:17 in the morning, a woman entered the server room using my access card, but as you can see clearly, that person isn't me. It's Victoria Ashford. On the screen, the image of Victoria in black walking into the server room appeared. Clear and undeniable, Evelyn continued. Second, the system log shows the email that was supposed to be mine sent to Viewlov was actually sent from the IP address of Victoria's office at 2:30 in the morning. Meanwhile, I checked out of the building at 7 the evening before with camera proof confirming it. Third, the $50,000 in my mother's account was transferred from Northern Star Holdings, a shell company with direct ties to the Volkov organization. And fourth, we traced email exchanges between Victoria and an address linked to Volkov over the course of months. Victoria's face grew paler with every piece of evidence. When the video played, she shot up from her chair as if she'd been shocked. This is fake. She's a hacker. She made all of this. Victoria turned to Sebastian, her voice slipping into desperation and shaking. Sebastian, you know me. 8 years. 8 years I've been at your side, working for you, loyal to you. You're going to believe a delivery girl who came out of nowhere more than you believe me. The room sank into a silence so tight it was hard to breathe. Every eye turned toward Sebastian, waiting for his decision. This was the moment that would decide everything. And Evelyn could feel her heart hammering like it wanted to break free. Richard Thornton spoke up, his voice cautious. The evidence needs to be independently verified before we draw conclusions. Sebastian looked at Victoria for a long time, then at Evelyn. And finally, he gave an order in a voice cold as ice. Get it up here. Verify everything right now. The next 30 minutes were the most tense stretch of Evelyn's life. She stood in a corner of the room, forcing her face to stay calm while her heart raced wildly. Victoria sat in the opposite corner, her eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal, searching for a way out. Sebastian sat motionless at the head of the table, his face set like stone. Looking at no one in the room, no one spoke a word. Only the ticking clock and the clatter of keys from the IT staff working broke the suffocating silence. Tyler Brooks walked into the conference room with a calm expression that looked carefully controlled, even though Evelyn knew the tension inside him had to be no less than her own. He sat down at the computer and began checking the system logs, comparing them to the evidence Evelyn had presented. 30 agonizing minutes dragged by like 30 hours, and every tap of Tyler's keys echoed through the silent room like a hammer striking Evelyn's heart. At last, Tyler lifted his head and looked at Sebastian with a serious gaze. The logs are all authentic. There's no sign of tampering or fabrication. The email was sent from Miss Ashford's computer at 2:34 in the morning. Miss Carter checked out of the building at 7:12 the evening before, and there's camera proof confirming it. The instant those words were spoken, Victoria's face went white as paper. She sprang to her feet and lunged for the door. But the 2 security men moved fast, blocking her and holding her back. Victoria began screaming and sobbing, her face twisting with desperation and panic. Sebastian, please. I did everything for you. For this company. Sebastian stood and stepped in front of Victoria, his eyes ice cold, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. You sold us out to Viewlov. You put everyone in danger. For what? Money. Power. Victoria looked at Sebastian, and in that moment, the mask finally fell away. Her voice turned bitter, soaked in hatred. You were going to replace me with her, a nobody, a delivery girl who walked in off the street. I gave you 8 years. 8 years I stood at your side. Did everything you asked. Waited for the day you'd finally see me. I'm the one who should have been beside you. Not her. Sebastian stared at Victoria with eyes that held not a single trace of emotion. You were never that person, Victoria. You never had what it takes. Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking with outrage. And she does. She's nothing. Sebastian turned to look at Evelyn, and there was something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Then he looked back at Victoria, his voice firm. Final. She's more than you'll ever become. Sebastian signaled the security team, and they began dragging Victoria out of the room. In Sebastian Blackwood's world, betrayal wasn't handled by police or ordinary courts. Victoria seemed to understand that, and she began screaming wildly as she was pulled toward the door. You'll regret this. Volov won't forget. This isn't over. The door slammed shut and Victoria's screams faded as she was taken farther away. The room sank into a heavy silence, leaving only Evelyn, Sebastian, Richard Thornton, and Tyler. Sebastian turned to Evelyn, and for the first time since the day she'd been fired, he looked her straight in the eyes. I owe you an apology. I should have believed you when you needed it most. I failed you. Evelyn looked at the man standing in front of her. The man she'd once trusted, the man who turned his back on her in the moment she needed him most. She didn't smile. She didn't show relief or gratitude. Her voice stayed calm, but it carried the weight of the days she'd just endured. Yes, you failed. She didn't give him easy forgiveness. She'd been betrayed by someone she trusted, and that wound couldn't heal with an apology alone. Richard Thornton stood and stepped toward Evelyn, his face serious, touched with shame. Miss Carter, we owe you more than an apology. You didn't just prove your innocence. You exposed a threat we didn't even know existed. Evelyn nodded, accepting his words without a smile. Justice had been served. The truth had been dragged into the light, but the wound inside her was still there, raw and deep. She'd learned an expensive lesson about trust and betrayal in the world of powerful people. After Richard Thornton and Tyler left the conference room, only Evelyn and Sebastian remained facing each other in the silence. Sebastian stood by the window, looking out at Manhattan, sinking into the light of sunset, then turned back to her with an expression Evelyn couldn't read. I want you to come back. Not as an interpreter. As Director of International Relations, with full authority to build your own team. Anything you need, anything you want. Evelyn looked at him, her face giving away nothing. And if I refuse, Sebastian let out a breath. And in that moment, he looked more tired than Evelyn had ever seen him. Then I'll understand. But I'm asking you to give me a second chance. Give this company a second chance. Evelyn stayed quiet for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened, about the days of suffering, about the fear that had wrapped around her whenever she thought of her mother, about the darkest night when she'd nearly given up. But she also thought of Tyler, who'd risked everything to help her. Of Derek, who'd pushed past fear to put a weapon in her hands, of her mother waiting at home with that trusting smile. I'll agree, but I've got conditions. Sebastian nodded. Say them. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice firm, burning with purpose. I want this company to create a scholarship program for people like me. Talented people who never get a chance at education. People who never get treated fairly because they don't have the right connections or the right background. I want them to have the opportunity one never had. Sebastian was silent, watching her with eyes Evelyn couldn't decode. She continued, her voice stronger now. And I want human resources to review its hiring policies. No more judging people by degrees or the address where they live. Judge them by what they can do. Sebastian nodded slowly and something shifted in his gaze. A deeper respect than before. Done? You can lead those programs yourself. It'll be part of your responsibilities. Then he stepped closer until only a few paces remained between them. Eve, I made a mistake. The worst kind of mistake. I doubted someone who deserved to be trusted. I don't know if you can forgive me. Evelyn met his eyes without looking away. I don't know either. Trust takes time to rebuild. Sebastian nodded, accepting that answer. I've got time, if you're willing. A quiet moment passed, their eyes holding, and something changed in the air. Not love, not yet, but possibility. The beginning of something new, built on truth and respect. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice softer. We'll see. Before leaving the conference room, Evelyn suggested to Sebastian that Tyler Brooks be promoted to head of security analysis. And that he be protected from any retaliation. Sebastian agreed at once. Tyler met Evelyn in the hallway after the meeting and he shook his head in disbelief. You didn't have to do that. Evelyn smiled for the first time in days. You risked everything for me. That's not something I can forget. Evelyn also made sure Derek Hansen wouldn't face any consequences for helping her. His daughter's scholarship at Collier was guaranteed permanently, and he received a raise along with a well-deserved bonus. Derek met Evelyn in the ground floor lobby as she prepared to leave. The middle-aged man's eyes wet with emotion. Thank you for everything. Evelyn took Derek's hand, her voice sincere. No, thank you. You gave me the weapon to fight. Evelyn stepped out of Blackwood Tower, as the sun sank beyond the Manhattan horizon. This time, she wasn't the condemned woman leaving with a cardboard box of personal belongings and tears streaking down her face. This time, she walked out as a winner. 3 months had passed since the day justice was carried out. Evelyn Carter now sat in her own office on the 35th floor of Blackwood Tower. A wide glass window framing Manhattan as it stretched out below. She'd built a team of 12 people, a mix of seasoned professionals and young talents from difficult backgrounds like her own. Her mother, Margaret, was now being treated at one of the best hospitals in New York with a private nurse caring for her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The two of them had moved into a new apartment near the hospital, clean and warm, spacious enough for them to have their own space, while still staying close to each other. On Evelyn's desk lay a stack of scholarship applications from the program she'd founded. 25 applications from gifted young people across New York. Many of them speaking 3 to 4 languages they'd taught themselves. Others carrying extraordinary skills developed not because they'd had opportunities, but because they'd had no other choice. Evelyn reviewed each application carefully, searching for people like her. Raw gems waiting to be found. Her office door opened and Sebastian walked in with a rare smile on his lips. "Good news, Mr. Wei wants to triple the investment, and he specifically requested you handle all negotiations going forward. He said he'd never met anyone who understands both language and culture the way you do." Evelyn smiled. "I'll schedule the meeting for next week." Sebastian sat down in the chair across from her desk, his gaze drifting to the window for a moment before returning to her. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't heard that call with Mr. Wei that day. If you'd just delivered the package and walked away." Evelyn looked at him, her voice gentle, but carrying the quiet wisdom of someone who'd survived storms. "I've learned that sometimes the smallest choices change everything. I only did the right thing. The rest was fate." Sebastian nodded. Or maybe that was exactly what was meant to happen. They looked at each other and Evelyn could feel the relationship between them still being built. One step at a time, slow but steady. Sebastian rose to leave, but his phone buzzed in his hand. He looked at the screen and his face darkened at once. Evelyn noticed the change. "What is it?" Sebastian looked at her, his voice tight. "View love." He sent a message. Just 2 words. What did it say? Sebastian held the phone out so she could see the screen. 2 English words stood out. Stark and clear. "Not over. Victoria confessed before she was dealt with. Volov knows about you now." Evelyn stared at the message, then lifted her head and met Sebastian's eyes. Her voice didn't shake. There was no fear in it, only resolve. "Then we'll face it. Together." Sebastian nodded, deep respect in his gaze. Together. After Sebastian left, Evelyn stood alone by the window, looking out at Manhattan, sinking into the light of sunset. Down there were the streets where she'd once run deliveries every day, the buildings she'd entered as if she were invisible, the corners where she'd stopped to swallow a cheap lunch before hurrying on. The view from the 35th floor was nothing like the view from street level. But Evelyn never forgot where she came from. That was what made her different from the people around her, and it was what made her strong. Evelyn Carter had walked into this building to deliver a package. She ended by giving something far more valuable, a lesson in courage, in justice, and in the transforming power of giving people the chance they deserve. And this was only the beginning. This story brings us deep lessons about life. That talent can be found anywhere, not only in prestigious schools or wealthy families. That resilience and courage can help us overcome challenges that seem impossible. That justice sometimes comes late, but if we don't give up, it will come. And that one small decision, one brave moment can change an entire life. Dear friends, how do you feel about this story? Have you ever faced a similar situation in your own life? Being misunderstood or treated unfairly? Have you ever had to fight to prove your worth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear the stories from deep in your hearts. If this story touched your emotions, please hit the like button and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss these heartfelt stories each day. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.